Welcome everyone to another exciting Cassandra Kubernetes SIG. I'm your host. I'm not going to do that. We're not doing that. This is a community meeting. So we have a few things I posted on Twitter, like about Chris has this. He's been collecting information. He's been out there like a little hamster, collecting information from community on things that need to be in Cassandra in the future, but we'll talk about that towards the end. I thought some updates along the way would be good. My first and foremost update is, and this is a big one, folks, CNCF has agreed to host a Data on Kubernetes Day at KubeCon EU, which of course is a virtual event. So it might as well just be KubeCon Spring, because it's not like we're actually traveling to Amsterdam. But they're going to host a Data on Kubernetes Day. And so this is really cool. CNCF is really gaining more, there's more attention to CNCF about data on Kubernetes. So this is their move of like, yeah, we're going to put some skin in the game here. So just be on the lookout. I'll post some stuff in there. There will be some CFPs out for talks. It'll be probably, I was just in a meeting before this about it, like, okay, we'll probably do like 20 or 30-minute talks, that sort of thing. Just keep it moving. It'll be ApacheCon style. It'd be great to get user stories and talking about, hey, here's how I ran data on Kubernetes. And it's not just Cassandra. It'll be folks running MySQL, Postgres, Mongo, whatever. But, you know, stateful workloads on Kubernetes is a proficiency you have to build, and it's kind of an exciting space right now. So that's really exciting news. I'm happy. It seems like we're getting validated all the time. Questions on that?
And when is that? I'm just sorry. Go ahead.
No. Yeah. When is it? Is that before KubeCon? Like a day before?
It's after
like
May 8, I think is the day. May 5 through 7 is KubeCon, and then May 8 is Data on Kubernetes Day. They're very careful. They don't want it to overlap, take away from all the fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. So don't log out just yet. I was gonna say don't book your flight too early, but no. Yeah. Cool. All right. Can we just kind of keeping track of the agenda? John, go ahead.
Looking at the Data on Kubernetes Slack, are you wearing a Data on Kubernetes shirt? Because the logo looks eerily It is.
No shit. I thought it was like a Beats logo.
Here we go. Shameless plug. If you want one of these, you got to do the meetup.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm down.
Yeah, Rahul. Yeah, it's not even a question, right? And
Foundation DB, by the way.
See,
this is antique / vintage.
Send me your address immediately. I will fix this so quickly. Oh my God, vintage. We only talk about open source databases. So if you want one of these shirts, Data on Kubernetes community, you can give a talk. They do meetups every week. Today was one, but it's a fast growing community of just general data on Kubernetes knowledge, not just one particular database. So go team. All right. John, maybe you can give us an update on state of operator.
Yeah, so there's been some changes in progress for CAS operator. I'll just quickly run through some of them. So there's in CAS operator in the spec, there's an additional seeds property particularly used for multi-DC, and it requires an IP address. The PR is just approved to add support for host names. And so I'm not sure with respect to multi Kubernetes cluster, how that will play. But in terms of within a single cluster, For example, you could specify makes it a little bit easier. You could have another Cassandra data center in a Cassandra data center object in a separate key space, and then just simply specify the seed service for it to connect the two. And then there's a ticket that's been open for since prior to 1.6 for being able to add support for being able to provide user specified labels and annotations on the various services that the operator creates. And that is there's a PR for that should probably be merged as well. A couple other tickets that I think are worth just to point out, in case anyone has any thoughts on the first one. Let me. Where is it? Let me. Okay, here we go. I'll put it in the chat. It's for creating key spaces and roles. And then the second one is for creating per pod configuration. So CAS operator already has support for creating roles. And you can specify whether or not that role is a super user. There's no support for specifying permissions. And then, so I've thought about this a little bit. I haven't, or maybe I did reply to the ticket. I'm kind of on the fence of whether or not I think it's something that should be built into CAS operator, into the operator itself. I almost wonder if it would make more sense if it should be like a CRD for that and a job, because we're dealing with non-native Kubernetes resources. So they're going to live in Cassandra, and I mean, unless you have a different auth system. And so in terms of from a controller perspective, how do you reconcile that? You're not just dealing with the state of the world with respect to the API server, you're dealing with the state of the world with respect to Cassandra. And so I think it's more there, it's about installation configuration. And so, and I say the CRD to go along with it, because to provide, you could do it any number of ways, but provide a little bit higher, some more rich semantics. And then the other one, I think Jeremiah opened that. CAS operator uses CAS config builder / and CAS config definitions for generating the configurations. And there's basically a DSL with that. And if you're familiar with the CAS operator spec, there's a field called configuration, and the contents of it look almost identical to your Cassandra.yaml and JVM options, which is great. But you're limited, and it's basically a limited to basically cluster-wide config settings. So, and in particular, if you want to specify individual tokens for individual nodes, you're not able to do that. And of course, one of the challenges there really is more to do with stateful sets. Stateful sets don't give you an easy way to specify per pod settings. So that'd be a really nice enhancement. So let's see, and then hopefully, so those are the two that I just wanted to mention. I had mentioned the ones that are in flight. And then, the other thing is I had opened up a ticket to upgrade upgrade the version of Operator SDK. It's on around an older version, like 0.17, and starting at 1.0, there's a big change to go to the kube builder, basically more being in line, consistent with kube builder, but more importantly, upgrading the various Kubernetes library dependencies. So that's something that we'll hopefully look to tackle in the near future, but probably not in the next, what I guess would be 1.7 release. So it'd be after that. That's all I got.
Out of curiosity, John, is that upgrade necessary to get rid of the warnings when we install CRDs with the V1 beta API?
Great question. Yeah, I have to check with. So I know in I have to check. I know for Cassandra, the CRDs, yes, and the upgrade there will be easier because they're already on newer versions of Operator SDK. So I'll have to check with Cas Operator.
Just a quick, because I'm taking notes, I'm going to put it on the wiki, and eventually when I get editorial support, we'll get it into the blog.
Oh, do you need
So-
that? I can do that right now, by the way.
What's that?
I can make you I can give you the rights to create and edit on you're talking about the Cassandra wiki?
Oh, I made some notes. I think I can do that. I think I can do that
Okay.
right now. Yeah. No, I've been posting notes. It's been like in my Google Docs silo. Now I just put the notes straight on there, and whatever. If it's not perfect, it's not perfect. You know, at least it's out there. So I got 4 items from you, John. New section in spec for seeds supports host names. That's pull request 399. Should Cas operator have CRDs for key spaces and roles? That's 382. Issue 382. Should Cas operator have pod specific configurations? That's 396. And then finally, the last one is 395, right? The operator SDK one.
No, 398.
8.
I can put the PRs that I mentioned here. Let me just put them in the chat real quick. 398, and then
Okay.
there we go, and then 399, and the 399. That's not a new field in the spec. It just expands that to allow for strings for using DNS to do a DNS lookup in addition to the IP address.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
There is the ticket that I mentioned, or here, let me put it in select the operator around operator SDK.
I thought it was 395.
Oh, maybe that is. That's, I just wanted to mention that just so it's on, just to make people aware. That's just on the radar and something that look to tackle. But that unfortunately, due to I think there's 2 ways of looking at this. We've had some discussions. We could look at just upgrading the various library dependencies, controller runtime, for example, and not worry about operator SDK to some extent. But I think it's my preference would be to go ahead and just upgrade operator SDK, and that entails more work because of the changes within the scaffolding and the project layout. So that'll be a little bit more involved upgrade.
Is there one that makes the other easier or irrelevant? Or we have to do the work anyways, right? At some point.
Yeah. And the so for example, like I said, you could probably get by without the operator SDK upgrade, but of course, because operator already is using some limited use of some operator SDK libraries. That's fairly isolated. But then there's other aspects, for example, with, like, let's say downstream and for the usage in Cassandra, we're in the other operators utilizing Customize particularly for development and testing. And so consuming Cas and taking the Cas operator manifests and using those with Customize. So it'd be nice just to get those kind of lined up and in sync and do that upgrade.
Got it.
I'd say I really like this CRD for creating schema. I know that was a while back when you said it, but I'm like, yes. You said there was something about it that might not work?
No,
382 I'm talking about.
382. Yeah, so okay. No, the issue is, so the workflow when you're writing an operator controller, it's here's the desired state of the world, and here's the actual state, and it's just a continuous loop, right, to make sure that the two converge. And so, and then that state is typically represented, you know, in by the, we get that from the API server. Well, when you're dealing with state that's not in the API server, it gets a little bit trickier, because we have, with the controllers, we've got a whole bunch of plumbing provided for us with the client Go library that sets up the watches and gives us the notifications when we get changes. If you're trying to manage state that's external, I mean, you can still be running in the Kubernetes cluster, you don't have those same capabilities. And so a lot of questions come up with how should you do that? And it's not specific to Cassandra. In fact, I was having a discussion with teammate Michael Berman about, for backup restore, what do we do with, you know, like S3 buckets we want to manage? So, you know, if we build this into the operator and we just basically say, well, and so like, let me talk about what the operator already does with the users. You can put in the spec, tell the operator to create a user, right? And it does that. It does it perfectly well. And we leverage that extensively in Cassandra. But I could go into CQ with a Cassandra client, CQLSH, you know, driver, and change that role, delete that role. And I can alter that role. Now, if I delete it, the operator, actually, I'm not sure. I've got to check to see, will CAS operator go and recreate it? It might. But if I alter the role, say if I take the super user and make them a non-super user, you know, that CAS operator, where do you draw the line? And so I think it gets a little bit fuzzy in my mind, you know, in terms of division of responsibility, and wonder if it just be simpler, make more sense. Like I said, it's we know I definitely want the install and configuration, create key spaces, configure them, create roles, permissions. Do we want to have a operator that is, whether it's CAS operator or something else, that is going to try to go ahead and manage those as well?
I think if you build a CRD with this in mind, you have to reconcile and make sure what you have in the database is what's on your CRD. That's what. But
you don't have to. You can have the CRD without a controller for it. You can define.
Yeah, but I mean that's the objective of the CRD. I mean, is to define what you want as a state in the cluster. So if you say I want this, right, and people change it, you have to change it back. Else you're not in the scope of the CRD, I think.
Well, then, in that case, then, like, I guess the motivation for suggesting the CRD was mostly just to provide a little bit more rich, I say, semantics versus give me a config map with what you are, you know, or for example, that you're going to pass to the job for deploying everything. So, you know,
but you're basically still counting on. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I mean, we have another operator about NIFI, which we call NIFI COP, and we also deploy clusters of NIFI NIFI nodes, and we also deploy, data flows with that. And what our operator love is that you define your data flow, it gets deployed on the cluster, and if the guys change it manually, then the operator will change it back to what it's supposed to be in the Git. When you're doing GitOps, I mean, CRDs are really interesting. So it's more that's the real gain, I think, in my opinion. I mean, we want people not to use CQLSH anymore and to define everything that they can in CRDs.
Yeah, I think it makes sense if you go to this type of flow that you basically don't let the user alter it in CQLSH anymore, right? The operator's checking and watching and just, nope, you told me the schema is supposed to look like this. That's what it's going to look like.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions from like the complainer user. Okay, which is, I like the idea, by the way, right? I love Terraform for that reason. What I have is a state. If I hit apply, it goes there. It's what I like about Kubernetes. What I have is a state, I push it, it does it, right? This is why I like these systems. Now, when we're talking about schema, I think about it as slightly different, because it's not just the quote infrastructure as code. Because although, like, I tell people, like, look at Cassandra as an infrastructure, right? Put a table up there, put a key space up there. You've got a microservice essentially, and you just need to put some shit on top of it, right? But there's more to it than just the state of it being there or not being there, or potentially the schema elements, right? There's the fact that there's data there. And so if you make a change, what is the responsibility of the operator for the data that's there? Now, I hate code, what's called code first programming, right? You code and it makes your database for you. I hate that shit. Other people love it. But once people get into it, the reason they love it is because they make their schema change in code and it builds out and it alters the thing, but it migrates the data for them, right? It's kind of a given in their mindset. So the question is, as a user, should I be expecting that, oh, well, you know, it's going to magically move my data over, or it's going to do something for me, but I don't have to worry about my data? Like, is that an expectation that we want to set or not?
I think that's kind of tricky here, because I mean, I think back to the Ruby on Rails days where you would like you'd write your migrations and there would be up and down commands, and sometimes those were one way and you couldn't, like, let's say you drop a column, you don't get the data back, you could recreate the column. I think the other question that kind of comes to mind when we think about operators is, if I change something inside of the database, say I have a super user account, how long until the operator should go in and check that state and reconcile it? Because a lot of the reconciliation from the operator is based on events coming from Kubernetes. Now it either has to trigger at a certain time to do a sync and say, hey, has something changed inside of the Cassandra world that I need to reconcile? I also wonder if this feature, this is talking about a CRD here specifically. I wonder if this feature is something that we build into the management API. If you want to have that kind of tooling, maybe it's not part of it directly with the CAS operator. Maybe there's an operator that can do this for you, and you kind of opt into that kind of behavior.
So two things. I think so. It certainly could be built into the management API, and I think there, but I think that's a secondary concern from the discussion, because so you could have a controller that's going to still communicate and make those changes through the management API, or you could do like the job that I suggested in the same way. With respect to what you said about the when do you go back and make the change, here's where I say where it gets tricky, because we have writing controllers. If you're not, when you have the framework, the tools with Operator SDK, Kube Builder, makes things really easy. I'm not writing it from bare bones. I have using the client Go, and it has, I think it's on the client Go website. There's a really good diagram, shows you all the components involved in the workflow. So if the default resync period for a watch is 30 minutes. So if you're watching a particular Kubernetes kind, and there's no changes, you'll get a resync in 30 minutes. That doesn't mean you hit the API server. It just means that a reconciliation request gets queued up, and you'll see, okay, is there anything I need to do? If you have an event that happens, a CRUD operation, you're going to get notification for that request to happen immediately. For something that's in Cassandra, role gets created, that workflow does not exist. So you'd have to recreate that plumbing, to do that reconciliation. So that's one concern. Totally doable, right? I mean, but then the other question is, like Raul was saying, where do you draw the line in terms of what where the handoff between what should be done by the controller of the operator versus the application and so forth? And that's where it gets, I think, as I said, what did I say? Fuzzy, yeah, in my mind.
Well, in the issue, we were just talking about key space and roles. We're not talking about data and columns and stuff like this. So, which is another.
You're talking about tables, right? I mean, if you're going to let people define tables in there, right, then you are getting into data.
Yeah, but in the issue, there was only about key space and role. Is it table as well?
So
yeah, the issue just said key space and roles.
Okay.
That's different then.
It's interesting about the key space though is there's properties on it. So let's say I set my replication strategy, and
I mean, the other thing, you still are kind of talking about tables, because what if you go in and the key space goes away? you drop the other key space, which is deleting all the user's data, right? I mean, so that, you know, I mean, so even if you're only talking about key spaces, you're talking about,
Yeah.
you know, adding and removing them possibly, which is, you know, ultimately affecting data.
And just, you know, this is not the feature request. When I saw that, I was like, oh, this is great because it's not contrived. This is something that is a very real, you know, use case.
Mhm.
In Cassandra, we are kind of reaching over our shoulder to get to our elbow to create the Reaper key space, because when we
Mhm.
initially implemented it, the management API didn't have support for key spaces. So we create a Python script to run it as a job to do it. So it's pretty hacky. Similarly, deploying Stargate, you know, it has its own key spaces. It'd be nice if we could go ahead and, I mean, they get created, but it'd be nice if we say, hey, up front, here's what we want for the replication settings. You know, and so whether it was just a job or having that functionality in some way certainly would be nice.
So I'm looking
on-
at.
So on our side, our ops just don't want the operator to have any access to CQLSH. So we're not allowed to create or delete or touch anything. We're here to create the cluster, not to interact with it. Just that's how it works for us.
Yeah,
Just
my guess is if we do want to go into this type of stuff with the operator, we don't necessarily resolve, like we only do it on like first install or something like that, right? Like we only let it happen once, and it's not something where we try and reconcile it or anything like that, because there's whole, you know, massive complex tool sets out there for doing schema migrations.
Yes.
And I don't think we
Yeah.
want to be recreating that in the operator. But I can definitely see, like you said, John, right, the first setup experience of deploy this cluster and all the key spaces get the right replication factors and, you know, stuff like that for, you know, the infrastructure deployed by the operator.
Well, I think of CI/CD. This is where it belongs, you know, because it's, if I'm initializing a cluster with a schema and I pull the schema, if you could pull the schema from Git and you deploy it, and then you start ingesting data into it, or you know, you restore a backup into it, that all makes sense. Yeah, I agree. Like an existing cluster schema migration, hot no. But that's not the use case. I think that's not why I was saying yay. You know, as a developer advocate, I love it because now I can actually show someone, here's a fully initialized cluster buying in one YAML file. But beyond that, yeah, I'm with you. This is exciting.
So I think it shouldn't be by the CRD though. Maybe another way to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Frank.
I don't know if there is any CRD that is not reconciled in the world of operators.
I mean, there are a few things we can steal as idea from those migration tools you're talking about, Jeremiah, which is, you know, what is the thing that we want people to write and save into source control? Is it CQL or is it YAML? You know, and what's this other tool that we're taking a look at? But you know what it does, it looks at the differences and saves XML, but it can also save CQL or SQL or whatever, right? But when I think about deployment right now, I'm not saying I'm not open to new ideas. Right now, it's like, well, the software is about to get deployed. There's a CQL file with, you know, drop if exists, and then it creates new stuff. Like that's basically what we do when we redeploy code, but there's an existing Cassandra cluster that's there. And everything is not state reconciliation. It's all, we know that this thing is malleable and we don't expect anything to be there. So we're going to either drop stuff and recreate stuff if we need to. But that's a different thing when we're in production, when it's like, we're not running those type of statements. Hell no, right? We're going to lose our jobs if we do that. So there's like a different use case when we're in CI/CD development and when we're in CD for upstream beyond dev integration.
Maybe that could be a use for a plugin, I would say. Like we didn't know what to do with a plugin. So that could be something. They use the plugin to execute that SH. I don't know.
The question for you,
like on cluster creation. run this script or something, or execute this YAML against the Kubernetes cluster, and that YAML could be a job to create your schema, like a kind of like a lifecycle hook.
I mean, as long as it's documented, it's like, hey, this is what you do if you want to run whatever. Put your CQL file here. Put your that would be the thing I would expect, right? Just put your CQL file here, refer to the CQL file, and it's either stored, you know, as in
Git.
I don't know if it makes sense to store it anywhere as a secret or a config map, but just put it somewhere.
There's the timing for that as well. Like when do we run that schema change? Is it after, like, we want to make sure it happens after, if you're running a single data center, like the whole DC is up, or do we want to wait till like the first node comes up, with the seeds come up, and we can satisfy the replication factor? Like, I think there's some edge cases that need to be kind of worked through there as well.
Well, we already have some logic in the operator where basically it waits for the whole cluster to come up before it starts applying the stuff that it does, right? Like making the super users and applying the auth settings, and this to me would just be the same kind of thing. Like, we're already doing this.
You know what this needs?
For the first time.
A state machine. I love state machines, don't you? All right, diagram that up. No, this is complicated, but I'm almost ready to retract my previous statement. Maybe we do need to get into the schema management game here in Kubernetes land. Because sorry, JD, the reason I'm thinking this now is because you do kind of have to have cluster-wide knowledge before you do schema changes or like schema migrations. I know we're going to talk about roadmap stuff for Cassandra later, but joking, not joking, that does seem inside the domain eventually. We will have to have schema migration somewhere. As a community, we need something like this.
There's a question of whether it exists inside that operator or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need something like that, but I don't know that it.
I actually think it's
operator. To me, it's a different tool. It's a separate tool.
It's a schema operator.
Sure.
Yeah, and I would think of like, let's add more operators, because that's where the world needs more operators. But I don't think this is a Cassandra operator thing. I think this is an optional piece that you would bring in.
And also, if you think about, if we were talking about a relational database, right, we'd have a different conversation. How much of this could be possible, right? You could be like, okay, we'll make a new table, select star from, insert into, and then bam, we're done. We did some migration also for you. But because we're talking about Cassandra, don't have the tooling to be able to even imagine that right now. I mean, there's stuff out there, but it's like a separate Spark job, right? Like, you're not going to wrap that into an operator.
Yeah, exactly. You just, wrap a Spark cluster in your operator and
for migrations.
Yeah.
Set it up and tear it down.
Which is very appropriate for so many use cases because they suck at data modeling.
With about the schema management, the time series system that I worked on back when I was at Red Hat Ocular, like a lot of applications, would apply its own schema changes. It had a library for trying to manage those schema changes. And so when the web app was deployed, it would try to run through the schema changes. And then we tried unsuccessfully to put some synchronization in place to make sure that they weren't, avoid concurrent modifications. And we were constantly running into problems. So then eventually refactored the code that did apply the schema changes and pulled out and put it into a job. And then we were sure, because there was a separate team that was deploying our bits. And then we said, okay. And then then we were assured whether they were deploying one replica of our application or whatever, we knew that the job was going to run first. And we told them that. It was easy peasy from there, problem solved. And then we thought, it's like, why didn't we do this last year instead of like every month dealing with these bugs and then trying to fix people's schemas? And I don't know how other people were developing apps and managing schema changes for Cassandra Kubernetes, but that seems like a sane pattern, if you will.
So I wrote a migration tool a long time ago, and it followed kind of the Rails model with the up and the down, and it would wait until each change had been applied. But it was actually run as part of the deployment. So you would deploy a new version of the application.
Yeah.
The first thing it did as part of bringing up the new version was, okay, run my schema migrations, whether that's create the database or alter the table, create new tables, whatever, right?
It had a Greek name. I remember it.
Trireme. Yep,
Yeah, that's right.
it does exist.
Can we have no more Greek name projects? Can we just agree on that? We're done.
So I linked in the Zoom chat a link to the Crossplane docs. Crossplane is a tool to provision cloud infrastructure with Kubernetes CRDs. And so this is a link to the RDS instance parameters. So this is what you would provide as part of your CRD to create an RDS instance. And in this vein, the only thing that they let you provide is the name of the database. Anything else is outside of the scope of what it does.
Yeah.
And
Makes sense.
it can be omitted too. Like if you don't provide it, they won't create a database for you. Just a reference for something in the wild.
This is cool. So I don't need Terraform anymore.
Fun fact, if they don't have a plugin to talk to a specific provider, they fall back to running a Terraform command inside of a job.
No way. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
Well, and also I think we should focus on what we need to do before we go all the way maybe to schema and stuff like this. I think we have enough for now. Now we're playing.
That is a great point.
Okay.
I
I
think
just wanted to say on the operator side, we are playing with a CAS operator to make it a multi-cluster by using the same approach we had with a multi-CAS cop, which was like to have another CRD that manages two different CAS cops that we used to do, and we're trying to apply it to CAS operator. To have one of the idea was to, if we could have our internal teams use existing CAS cop CRDs to manage CAS operators instead of CAS cops, that would be a quick win for us. So we are trying to make CAS operator work on different clusters. That's just because we're talking about operator state of the action.
So to be clear, you give that a CRD that describes the cluster, and then that operator would push out the Cassandra data center instances into the remote Kubernetes clusters. Awesome.
Yeah, that's the approach we had, and we're just trying that out. I mean, I'm not sure that's going to be your way of doing it, but we can try that and suggest that. I mean, it's.
Yeah, we're talking about the same thing here as well, right? There was a conversation yesterday about that kind of approach. I know some users that are doing it manually, and if you can just define the whole topology, it's not that difficult to push it to.
It's quite simple.
API.
I mean, yeah, it's quite simple. So it could be a quick way, an easy way for us to show the team that it's not that difficult to migrate from one operator to the other by just not changing anything, basically. That would be cool. Anyway.
So is this a good segue to switch over to roadmap stuff, Patrick, since you're chewing?
Yeah, no, you should do that while I'm eating. That's a great idea.
Okay, so there's now a public project under the Cassandra organization, and I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So I've referenced the GitHub public roadmap. If you haven't seen this out on GitHub, github.com/github/roadmap, it's a repo, and the repo is empty except for some basic information. But there's a project on it, and this project has GitHub's public roadmap. And we can see there's all these colors and things. These are labels that are on issues. And I looked at this a little bit as a point of reference for how we could build one out for running Cassandra on Kubernetes that involves both CAS operator and Cassandra. So over on the Cassandra side, it's similar, but it's at the organization level. So if we go to projects, there's a roadmap project. This is flipped public. Anybody can see this. And it's not everything here is set in stone. I really want to solicit community feedback and get some conversations around these things. We have rough quarters based on the calendar year around when these things can be scheduled. And I will note that we are in March, and this first column is the most full column. So obviously something needs to change here. So let's just want to be clear there. So there's also this future not scheduled section, which doesn't mean that it's not going to get done. It's just, it hasn't been scheduled. I will note that none of these have pretty colors, and that's because they're simple notes. What I'd like to see is, if it makes sense, these get converted into issues. There might already be an issue that exists. I want to bring those in. You can either convert these to issues, and then we can apply labels and get that same kind of view that we have here. The nice thing about it being at the project level, though, is when we want to convert it to an issue, we'll look at online cluster restore. If we wanted to convert that, it'll ask you what repository you want to attach it to. And so as CAS operator gets moved into the Cassandra organization, we can just choose, like, if it's a CAS operator thing, we can just click on CAS operator here. If it's a Medusa thing, we just click on Medusa thing. And then if it doesn't target a specific component, there is a roadmap repo where those issues can end up. Again, it's just to get the additional context information that you can expose through labels. That's why that exists. So if you'd like, we're going to make sure this gets put into the show notes, and Rahul, it's in Zoom chat if you'd like to check that out. I know you like to make the summaries. So but this is a rough shape. I want to discuss some things in here, though. If you're looking here in Q4, you see multi-Kubernetes cluster deployments. You might be like, why the heck are you waiting until Q4? Frank's saying that he's testing it right now with an operator that could be that can do this for us.
Yeah, Chris, that's my question. Why the heck are you waiting so long?
Exactly. So the pieces exist now to do multi-cluster deployments. There's a big gotcha around, does your network support this? Do you have pod-to-pod IP connectivity? The reason it's shown here in Q4 is that's when I like to see those gotchas, well, A, well documented, B, tooling to help in this space, and C, kind of feature complete. This doesn't mean that we're going to wait till Q4 to start developing this feature. I think some of the pieces are in place now, and we'll see development happening here. I mean, now in Q1, but through Q2 and Q3. I'd love to see this land much sooner.
Could you divide that into two roadmap items, like a beta version and then a solidified version, to
Yeah, I
make
think
that
that's
clearer
good.
from a roadmap perspective?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. And we see that here in how GitHub does their public roadmap. You'll see that there's beta and alpha tags on these various items. And so that's certainly something that we could do. So yeah. The general story that I'm trying to show here, though, is we have some specific integrations. Are those integrations code integrations, or are they just documentation for those particular environments? In some cases, there's automated tests that you want to build out to make sure that, hey, did this change like work in EKS but totally break deployments in GKE? So one of the things that we're trying to focus on, one of the things we're focusing on is a build out of integration tests and making sure that we test in a multitude of environments across a number of versions. The theme that I've kind of dubbed it is we want to be able to run on your Kubernetes and make sure that we aren't in a bad spot there. There's a couple of unknowns here with OpenShift and Tanzu. The gotcha there is if we're building out this automation to do that kind of integration testing, we want to make sure that there's a place where we can provision a Tanzu cluster, provision an OpenShift cluster programmatically to run those automated tests against, and then obviously tear it down. So this is a rough shape of it, and I'd like to get some feedback on how we can make this a little bit clearer to understand. To Jeff's point, when can we show that things are starting to be worked on into beta, into GA, that kind of progression? Any other thoughts on how we can be effective and changing and getting community influence into this process?
I've used this before, and the thing that I wished it had was like dependencies, but it's actually just a really good tool, and I think because it's integrated into GitHub, it's better than Trello. Although I like Trello for its same Kanban view. How I think what Jeff brought up is a really good point, which is how do we distinguish like what's coming up versus what's being worked on? And once we get the labels in place, it'll be much easier to see that. I think that's the big thing that would make it really useful.
Yeah, and I think the people, the users that are willing to go down the path and kind of work through some of the bumps as it's being developed and it's earlier in its completeness, I guess is how I would word it. Like I said, I know people that are running multi-region with Cas operator today. They're using the additional seats parameter. We want to make it easier to do that. So you provide the topology once, like what Frank is suggesting, right? And then blast that out to the various Kubernetes clusters. I actually really want to spend some cycles with multi-Cas cop and take a look at how you're storing things like the cube, basically the credentials, and how you is that just secrets? How do you specify this data center goes to this specific Kubernetes cluster? Maybe you specify the context, that kind of thing. Really interested to take a look at that and the results of your experiments there, Frank.
Yeah, feel free to ask Cyril, I suppose, for more technical issues. I mean, he'll be more. I know we're using some plugins like Admiralty to be able to connect to the other cluster, but that's a solution we found like 2 years ago. So maybe there's much better things now where it needs to be updated. Well, my first reaction is that it's really cool to have a roadmap. It's not easy to have. I mean, the roadmap tooling is never simple, especially when you have an organization with projects underneath. It's very difficult. So it's good to have a first, quite a complete first version. Let's see how we can put tags on it. If we want to put tags about priority, I suppose, or maybe the priority is made by the fact that it's planned for those releases. Could we expect a release for one of those quarters, or
So that's
one of each?
That's a great question. Do our releases align with the quarters, or is it aligned with a number of features coming together? There are some discussions happening around versioning and branching models and that kind of thing. I think, should we have a collection of features that holistically function as a release, it makes sense. I think it's possible that we would see releases aligned with the quarters, but it would not surprise me to see them a little bit more frequently too, at least to the development streams, so people can take them and try them. And it's not just like you have to build the operator or you need to grab this specific version. I'd love to see a little bit more tooling, say, like I'm using Helm as an example, but to say, hey, I want to install this version of the operator. Maybe it's a pre-release version, but it has this feature that I'm looking for, and I want to do some testing in my environment, make sure that it does what I need to do, and provide feedback.
Maybe I've not, because I've used the projects feature on here for a while, but isn't there kind of somewhere in between there's projects, there's issues, and there's like milestones somewhere that you can have like this particular thing as part of this milestone?
So I'll show you what that looks like with the Cassandra revoke, just because I know that there's one in there. If you go into issues, there is the concept of milestones.
Yeah.
And so there's a 1.0 milestone. Now, there's also a post 1.0 parking lot for things that did not quite make it. Jeff, did we get rid of that milestone, or am I thinking of something else? The label?
No. Click milestones. There should be two. There's the parking lot one that's there, and then the backlog. A parking lot's basically all the stuff that fell out of 1.0 that hasn't come back yet.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I was
It's
just-
like a pre-backlog.
I was wondering. I thought that okay. So maybe it's because it was closed. That's why it doesn't show up the list. So okay, this was an example, and you can see. So there are milestones that align with releases, and that's something that we could use to kind of denote what's going into a particular release. I believe this is what you're talking about, Rahul.
Yeah, and again, if I'm remembering correctly, like you can have there. I don't know how you visualize it in the project's lanes, but I thought that once you assign a milestone, it can show up as a label on the card itself. Yeah, I think
I believe that that's possible. I don't know off the top of my head though. Yeah, I don't have an example of it, but I will try that out after this call.
If you, Chris, if you jump to the org and then go to our like dev project, you'll see it kind of in action there. What we're talking about there. Yeah, click the first one, the very first one there. Or I'm sorry, go to projects on the across the menu there.
This
and then
project.
click the case standard. Yeah, click that one.
Okay.
And so like right under the content, you'll see
There you
there
go.
that's where the milestone shows up. I think that's what we're
Yes.
And it is fairly nice in here. Like if you just click that, it'll automatically filter the board to just that milestone content. So then you can see the milestone. So that works fairly well. Of all the limitations of this capability yet, that part of it works pretty well.
So as those notes get converted into issues and we can label them and we can assign milestones to them, we'll have a richer interface. Right now it's text, but there are ways to enhance it, I think is where we're getting at. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, do you have anything else here?
Well,
You got a lot, actually.
There's a lot going on in here. So there's some stuff that might be crazy too. So that's the other thing is I think that as we approach some of these, there's room for bigger discussions. And I think there's also room to reach out to other projects. So if we know anybody in like, say, some of the Ingress space like Kong or Voyager or Glue, say, hey, we'd like to talk about your Ingress as part of the project. And let's see how we can do something like a TCP Ingress. I think that's a valid conversation to have. But general themes, though, I think that are worth calling out are the start of the April to June. There's KubeCon is coming up in May, and I'd like to see some more complete documentation around the various cloud vendors. We're doing some projects to make that a little bit more complete, but it's a little misleading. I also think that this is a time where we can do a lot of the research to build out into the Q3 and Q4 vision. There's a question of, is there a cluster level operator that, like what you've described, Frank? Is there a CLI tool that can give us a more interactive method to communicate with our clusters? For example, if I want to run node tool against a node, there's like 3 or 4 steps right now. I need to get the secret for JMX. I need to run kubectl exec with those credentials plugged into the right spot, and then get my status or set compaction throughput or what have you. Is there value in some helpful command line tooling so you can say, hey, CLI space cluster name node tool status, and it can, assuming you have permission in your Kubernetes cluster, facilitate that. So you're not trying to go through all these different steps to make that happen. If you want to get a CQL shell, right? The process to do that can be, I don't want to say tricky, but I think there's room for some operations focused tooling that allows some of these ad hoc behaviors. And so some of that's kind of put in here. So CQL access tool, a question of should the management API support more node tool commands? So maybe you don't need to use node tool, you can use the HTTP client. These are a regular shell access tool, so how to get into a shell on a pod. Pre-flight check, do you have enough resources in your cluster to spin up the CRD that you created? these are some of the creature comforts that we'd like to see.
Yeah, I think those are all great, user ease of use ideas. The thing that I generally think about when I think about this challenge is, can I make it easy to have a jump box where I can do all of this stuff, and it's same tooling that I use everywhere else, right? So if it's one command to get into my quote jump box mode, and then I can just run node tool and I can just run CQLSH, then I'm cool, because I'm used to that, right? Now that's not the only way to do it. I like the fact, like, if you had even with like a prefix or a suffix, right? Like K CQLSH or K node tool, and just like it does it. It doesn't matter. Technically speaking, they're not that different, So
yeah.
Just to mention, on our cluster, you're not allowed to run kubectl exec. That's denied. You have to run ephemeral containers. So you basically you can provide an image with all the tooling you need, and people just do kubectl debug with the image you want on the node you want, and then you have your SQL. That's the way we do, because we have been denied kubectl exec, right? Because our ops are not really, they don't trust us.
Good ops team there. Good ops team.
Yeah, I think back to some of my shell commands and having to drive to the data center in the middle of the night because the network was attempted to restart on the shell box for the whole DC, and it did not come back up.
That's when you get your knock staff to walk in.
Oh, that particular one we did not have. I was working a knock at the time. I was the knock staff.
You were the knock staff. Okay, yeah. Whoops. Yeah. There's your mistake.
Yeah, mistakes were made.
Great. Well, does anybody have anything else? We're at the top of the hour or a little over, but good discussion on the CAS operator today.
I gotta hop, but Chris from Constantia has kind of like, hopefully he's happy with the content for the next SIG update, which is 2 months old already. But after this, we're in a kind of a workflow to where I create some basic stuff. He looks at it, put some pictures on it, and we'll ship it out to the blog. Goal is to be able to do bi-weekly updates, just like we have bi-weekly meetings, but they may be, a week or so behind. But that's all. I got to run, folks. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for participating today, and we'll see you next time.